Anyway, let's take a look at the CNN exclusive, the Jake Tapper one-on-one, where Biden addresses Putin's nuclear threats in Ukraine.
For doing this, sir. Appreciate it.
Happy to.
So for people at home who don't know, this is the map room. During World War II, this is where it was basically the situation room for FDR. He would look at sensitive information. And now we're at a period where there's another high-stakes war in Europe. You recently said that this is the first time since the Cuban Missile Crisis that there's a legitimate possibility of someone using a nuclear weapon, which could lead to Armageddon. That's the word you used. How realistic is it, do you think, that Putin would use a tactical nuclear weapon?
Well, I don't think he will, but I think it's irresponsible of him to talk about it. The idea that a world leader of one of the largest nuclear powers in the world says he may use a tactical nuclear weapon in Ukraine, and the whole point I was making was it could lead to just a horrible outcome. And not because anybody intends to turn it into a world war or anything, but it just, once you use a nuclear weapon, the mistakes that can be made, the miscalculations, who knows what would happen.
What is the red line for the United States and NATO, and have you directed the Pentagon and other agencies to game out what a response would be if he did use a tactical nuclear weapon, or if he bombed the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant in Ukraine, or anything along those lines?
There's been discussions on that, but I'm not going to get into that. It would be irresponsible of me to talk about what we would or wouldn't do.
Have you asked the Pentagon to game it out, though? I mean, just in case?
The Pentagon didn't have to be asked.
So French President Macron told me that he doesn't think that Putin is acting rationally. And he said that he thinks a lot of this is because of how isolated Putin was for 2 years during the pandemic. And others who have dealt with him, Condi Rice and Bob Gates and James Clapper, have used words like erratic and unhinged to describe Putin's behavior today. Do you think Putin is a rational actor?
I think he is a rational actor who's miscalculated significantly. I think he thought, you may recall, I pointed out that they were going to invade, that those 100,000 or more troops there, and no one believed that he was going to invade Ukraine. You listen to what he says. If you listen to the speech he made after, when that decision was being made, he talked about the whole idea of he needed to be the leader of Russia that united all the Russian speakers. I mean, I just think it's irrational.
So if he's not rational and
no, I didn't say he's not rational.
You said the speech is what
I think the speech is
okay.
His objectives were not. I think he thought, Jake. I think he thought he was going to be welcomed with open arms. That this has been the home of Mother Russia in Kyiv, and he was going to be welcomed. And I think he just totally miscalculated.
So you talked about this.
God damn. He said, I think he thought, little bro thought he was America. You are not him, dude. Brandon saying, you are not him. We will be greeted as liberators is what he thought was going to happen. Except, you know, when America runs that fucking line, okay, and does what it wants to do, wherever the fuck it wants to do it, all around the world, is still America. Okay, not only are they a nuclear superpower, but they're also a dominating hegemonic force on the entire planet. So it doesn't matter if they're not welcomed as liberators or not. It is wild, though. I don't necessarily disagree with what Biden is saying. I mean, I don't think that like Putin legitimately thought he was going to be welcomed as a fucking liberator. I think it's the same as America. He just thought he didn't give a shit. The part that he actually overextended on was the might of his conventional military forces. I think that and how much support Ukraine had gotten from NATO, and how much more powerful its standing army was with respect to like what it looked like in 2014. I think that's what it is. I think that he literally thought he could roll over. I think he thought that he could take down important infrastructure and also their air defenses in a matter of like 2 to 3 days. and he thought he could roll it. He could roll up his forces all the way into fucking Kyiv immediately. And he got his shit pushed in, had to consolidate the forces back into the Eastern Front, and engage in trench warfare on the Eastern Front. Go back to like a war that they are used to fighting. And their forces were hard to resupply. Their supply lines were already disrupted from the jump. Like, it was a very difficult task. So difficult that even dumbass American himbo Twitch streamers mentioned that overtaking the entirety of Ukraine will be impossible. Occupying it will be impossible over an extended period of time. And it will be a civilization-ending conflict. Which is why another dumbass Twitch himbo who also agrees with Biden in this circumstance thought Putin is bad, but he's not mad. Famously, that's what he said, whoever that guy was. But turns out, he is both bad and mad. A mad lad. He was mad because bad. What is this? Oh, Verdict Watch, Alex Jones defamation trial. Yeah, we'll cover this when it actually comes to fruition, when it ends. I think there's a good slab of ego in what he did as well. Likely wants to be remembered as a guy that made Russia bigger. I think like when he was also get why he wanted to strike Ukraine though. NATO knocking on his door, the bear bag in no corner. That part is fine, but ultimately it's not like you can make a risk assessment. Okay, you can make a risk assessment and then not act out in the worst way possible. Because if your goal is to undermine the influence of NATO, you did the absolute worst thing possible. Now you got Finland and Sweden. You know what I mean? Now you got everybody thinking, well, you don't even have a good enough conventional military force, so fuck the neutrality, the unspoken neutrality agreements that we had. We're just going to fucking join NATO. We're going to justify NATO's existence. Like, if your goal is to literally say, I want to undermine the influence of NATO at my doorstep inside of Ukraine, then invading Ukraine is the absolute worst, dumbest thing you could have done. Continuing to embolden, or rather continuing to strengthen your trade relationships with Europe would have been the adequate thing to do. It was such a appropriate thing to do that America fucking hated it. America hated the Nord Stream pipeline. Nord Stream 2 was something that America certainly did not want completed. And your European allies at that point were your trade partners, and they still wanted it. They wanted cheap energy. And you fucked it all up. Like, I already have a moral opposition to this kind of bloodshed, okay, across the board. I'm anti-war. I recognize that every side loses in conflicts like this. Especially the working class loses in conflicts like this, where they're either being forcibly drafted to go fight a war that nobody wants to fucking fight in, right? Or they're being invaded and getting bombed non-fucking stop, or even losing energy for 3 fucking days, right? It was just a major fuck up across the board. Denazification was an idiotic fucking propaganda point to justify your actions. And I say this as someone who has always, even way, way before the invasion of Ukraine, have talked about the Azov Battalion and America funding and training the Azov Battalion and Nazis and whatnot. It still does not justify full-scale military invasion of Ukraine, a position that I've held on to from the jump. Like, no part of Putin's stated goals were achieved with his actions. So it was fucking idiotic. If you don't want to galvanize and embolden Nazis, don't invade the fucking country. Because the one group of people that will be legitimized in their existence will be the most outwardly violent reactionary fascists. They will be the genuine emancipators. Their cause will be seen as just. All you will do is make more reactionary people. This is something that America has done over the course of the past 2 decades with its war on terror. I know this as an American citizen who has been covering the war on terror and the war in the Middle East for many, many years. So if your goal is denazification, congratulations, you emboldened and galvanized and strengthened Nazis, okay? Because just like what happened with the Taliban, for as many members of the Taliban as you kill, you're killing a bunch of cousins, you're killing a bunch of family members, you're creating new members of the Taliban. And the same goes for Azov and other like-minded reactionary forces that are now going to be institutionalized permanently within Ukrainian politics. You're going to strengthen NATO's influence because now everyone's like, okay, well, NATO does have a point. Also, if you care about denazification, I mean, there's like literally nationalist, hyper-nationalist, ultra-nationalist forces that Putin is using as well. So there's that too. Kind of interesting. Although an insurgency type situation didn't end up playing out, I do wonder if some Zelensky hardline stuff is because he's terrified of losing ground to the Ukrainian far right. We just don't have a clear picture of what's playing out in Ukraine. Russia is even worse, though. Yeah, but also on top of that, I think that Zelensky is more beholden to whatever the Western partners want out of Ukraine more than his like domestic politics and his fears of right-wing forces within the country overtaking him eventually. So there's that too. But let's get back to Brandon and what he has to say.
A few days ago, the search for an off-ramp for him, because his back is against the wall. There are questions about how rational he is. He already was a brutal dictator. What is the off-ramp? Is there any acceptable way that he can leave, in his mind, without seizing territory in a way that would not be acceptable to Ukraine?
I don't know what's in his mind, but clearly he could leave. He could just flat leave and still probably hold his position together in Russia. The idea that he's been able to convince the significant the Russian people that this is something that he thought made sense, but now he's accomplished what he wanted to do, and it's time to bring Russians home.
Would you be willing to meet with him at the G20?
Look, I have no intention of meeting with him, but for example, if he came to me at the G20 and said, I want to talk about the release of Griner, I'd meet with him. I mean, it would depend, but I can't imagine. Look, we've taken a position. I just did a G7 meeting this morning. The idea, nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine. So I'm not about to, nor is anyone else prepared to negotiate with Russia about them staying in Ukraine, keeping any part of Ukraine, et cetera. So it would depend on specifically what he wanted to talk about. But look, he's acted brutally. I think he's committed war crimes. So I don't.
And let me tell you, Jack, I know all about war crimes, so I'm the best guy to call it out.
I don't see any rationale to meet with him now.
When people hear the word Armageddon,
the notion that like we don't negotiate with terrorists when you're talking about a state actor on top of it, which by the way is a silly one, especially when you are the United States of America, obviously. But let's not even get into that. But ultimately, like talking to a state actor about the release or a prisoner swap for Brittany Griner, he's open to that, but he's not open to like giving Russia an off ramp in this. Giving Russia an off-ramp or even like trying to fucking put forward an olive branch as a mediator and just expecting Russia to continue bombing the living shit out of Ukraine and civilian territories within Ukraine, or even potentially waiting for further escalations, whether it be chemical weapons or whether it be fucking nuclear weapons, God forbid, is a little terrifying as far as prospects goes. Now, he will mask that, he will shroud that by saying, well, we're not going to have a conversation with Putin without Ukraine at the table, which is, of course, understandable. But the reality in this circumstance is that Ukraine's needs and Ukraine's wants, while legitimate, are still completely beholden to what America is willing to give. Okay? Because obviously, without NATO involvement, Ukraine would have looked a lot like Ukraine in 2014. It would have looked a lot like that. A standing military that is completely, wholly incapable of defending themselves against Russia's conventional forces even.
They get scared from used by a U.S. president. They get scared. Do you think in any way discussing this type of thing publicly, openly, Putin's possible use of nuclear weapons, might have the opposite effect of what you want? It might make some of our wobblier European allies be even more scared of confronting Putin.
Well, no, I don't think so at all. I think, look,
when you say it's not 2014 anymore and Ukraine is different now, yeah, it's not 2014 anymore because of NATO involvement, though. You recognize that, right? That's backed by America. America is offering both small arms and also missile systems to Ukraine currently. And without that kind of support, Ukraine would not be able to defend itself from Russia in any meaningful capacity. I fear that what must be done in every single part of this was trying to avoid further escalation. America itself is also considered further escalation to be to go too far at certain points, which is why they released that New York Times article openly condemning Ukrainian special forces, claiming that Ukrainian special forces were responsible for the terror attack against Dugin that ended up killing Dugin's daughter, right? There's no reason for them to come out and just fucking come out and say, like, that's wrong, that's fucked up that you guys did that, right? I know we will do it. We will do the Alex Jones verdict, but I'm talking about something different right now. Can we get to that in a second? I think it's a very concise video talking about what's happening in Ukraine. Talks about nukes, weapons donations, NATO, and the Nord Stream pipeline. You could juice the fuck out of this. No, I'm not going to fucking cover this random video that you want me to cover about this channel. My take is just like 25 minutes. I'm not going to do that right now, man. I don't know what happened. Did someone in my Discord watch this and they want me to fucking gas this up or something? Stop. You guys keep a lot of long-term community members are just pumping this video for some reason. It's so weird. Wait, what? When Chatter suggests videos, because I'm in the middle of commentary on something that's different.
Directed, when I'm talking to Putin. He, in fact, cannot continue with impunity to talk about the use of a tactical nuclear weapon as if that's a rational thing to do. The mistakes get made, and the miscalculation could occur. No one can be sure what would happen, and it could end in Armageddon.
And you still
Hasan, you really hate your viewers, don't you, lol? Yeah, famously, I'm a hater of my viewers. Obviously, that's the reason why I overstream by many, many hours every day. It's typical of me to do that. I don't think anybody believes that, but you know. Sorry, one
Are
second.
afraid of that, though, that it could.
Well, no, I don't think anyone, any rational person saying the initial use of of a nuclear weapon, killing thousands of people, does not have the prospect of leading to something that can be way out of control.
Let's turn to Saudi Arabia. Some of your Democratic allies on Capitol Hill are afraid that the U.S. got played when you went to Saudi Arabia and fist bumped with the Crown Prince, because now, obviously, a few months later, Saudi-backed OPEC is slashing oil production in partnership with Russia. The chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, Menendez, just called for a freeze on cooperation with Saudi Arabia, including most arms sales. Senator Durbin, the number 2 Democrat in the Senate, says the Saudis sided with Russia against the United States. Do you think it's time for the U.S. to rethink its relationship with Saudi Arabia?
Yes, and by the way, let's get straight why I went. I didn't go to one about oil. I went about making sure that we made sure that we weren't.
Okay, breaking news. Alex Jones is getting fucking absolutely fisted by the legal system, for the record. I'm just going to briefly mention it before we get further into it, but the Sandy Hook jury verdict is in for Alex Jones' InfoWars trial in Connecticut, and it's looking enormous. One plaintiff alone is getting $120 million. $120 million. Okay, pack watch for Alex Jones. We will cover all that in a little bit, though. I just wanted to briefly step in and mention that. But let's continue with this.
We're going to walk away from the Middle East and what was going on. And by the way, today I just got off the telephone with the president I got off the phone with the prime minister of Israel and the president of Lebanon. They've worked out a deal. They've been at war, declared war with one another for a long time. They've worked out a boundary relationship along in the Eastern Mediterranean for oil. And they're going to make an agreement that is historic. We also got overflights for Israeli planes over Saudi Arabia. We got movement in terms of how we would deal in the Middle East with aggression from Iran. But it wasn't, there were eight other parties there. It wasn't about oil.
Okay, but
But we should, and I am